For India, a country which is producing a legion of global giants that are competing head-to-head with the world's top power brands, the most worrying factor is that many, even today, are deprived of the basics of food, shelter and healthcare. Poor medical infrastructure has meant that India bears one of the heaviest disease burdens today. And despite increasing spends on drug research and development in the last decade, the healthcare industry will still need a booster shot if it has to be capable of serving our billions adequate and affordable healthcare. So Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, one of the best known names in the healthcare business, sets out to find the solutions with a very special guest today.
Hello and welcome to Addressing India's Healthcare Challenge with me, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. My guest today is Dr. Swati Piramal, an entrepreneur and someone who's very well known in the pharmaceutical world, having created a very large pharmaceutical industry. Swati is someone who has been very passionate about healthcare, and today I'm going to get her to share her thoughts with me about what she thinks India needs to do in building a very sustainable and a high quality healthcare system that delivers basic healthcare and good quality healthcare to every single Indian. Swati, thanks so much for coming on this show and sharing your views on such an important subject like, the healthcare challenge that we are facing today as a country. Let's start with, our favorite subject, which is, research in the pharmaceutical world. I mean, today, the Indian pharmaceutical sector is certainly looked upon as a front runner, and it has a great leadership profile in the generic space. And I think we both firmly believe that we should be able to even carve out a leadership position in novel drug development, because we know that for a country like India, it's very difficult for us to afford the expensive novel drugs that are introduced into the Western economies, and then we have to wait till it genericizes or until someone is able to then, imitate or create another version of that drug in this country. But I think the time has come for us to develop novel drugs with India in mind. And I'd really like to share with you some of your thoughts and in terms of what are the challenges we face in really addressing this kind of opportunity.
Kiran, I started R&D, a novel drug discovery research in 2000. So now it's been 10 years. And it takes that much time. It takes 10 to 12 years to find a new drug. Out of the 100 that you find, only one makes it to market. So it's a very risky business. And at that time, I was told that you don't know how to file a patent. You can only copy drugs, not invent them. You don't know how to file a dossier. The world FDA will never accept an Indian dossier. You don't know how to do clinical trials. But today I'm happy to say in 10 years we have proved otherwise. Today all our trials are done in the US, Canada, Europe, Australia and 5 continents.
But don't you think that if we did all those trials in India, it could be far more cost effective?
Yeah, Kiran, clinical trials, India was just an infant in the regulatory apparatus for developing new drugs. And so it would take 2 years to even approve a phase 1 trial. So you and I both went abroad, we did it somewhere else and then we came back to India. But if we can do the trials from zero to the end, we can develop affordable drugs at 1/10 the cost, not only for India, but for the whole world. It will change the paradigm of healthcare, I think, in the whole globally.
Today, healthcare systems across the world are collapsing under the heavy burden of rising costs. While healthcare spends in India have been negligible compared to the trillions that Western countries spend, the Indian pharma companies have a huge advantage when it comes to cost-effective drug innovation. But India is also losing a lot of this advantage because of low R&D investments and patent litigations.
There's this whole issue of patenting, and both of us have been really quite passionate about making sure that the patenting infrastructure in our country is beefed up.
78,000 patents are in the queue. That's a huge number. So while you're waiting You know, somebody else might develop a new form, or even if you've applied for it, but still it's not published, so people don't know about it. And why should there be such a large queue? You know, other countries, you get your patent quickly, you can exploit it, you can do things with it, you can apply, you know, make a new one, you can keep on improving. So I think really fundamentally the infrastructure is very weak. We need to improve that rapidly and quickly if we are to be a global superpower in the area of healthcare.
Yeah, and what we are talking about is it starts with research, having a strong research engine, having a strong research base. Because one of the things I've seen, you know, around the world is that, especially in the emerging economies, they have large markets, and you know, I think they have good marketing infrastructure, good marketing machinery, but they're all very poor at R&D, and I think that's where India can score. So, you know, if we can really focus on creating a very robust research infrastructure, you know, which includes, of course, as you rightly said, a patenting infrastructure that's world class, I think, you know, we can really play a very significant role.
You know, to quote Dean Nitin Noria, who's become the Harvard Business School chief, he said the first 10 years of liberalization, we focused on economies of scale and costs. Next 10 years, we focused on getting it a product out to rural areas like a mobile phone and so on. But the next 10 years, unless we become globally an R&D research driven innovative product economy, India isn't going to make it.
Absolutely.
So he said that 10 years we really have to focus on R&D. You look at the numbers, Indian companies spend less than 1% on R&D across the board. And countries like Israel, like Canada, like Taiwan, like Korea are doing much better than we are.
What should we do to really sort of make R&D or India the R&D hub of the world? What is it that will sort of, you know, make people confident, you know, buy into the fact that India can be an R&D engine?
I think there is something called a democratic lag. That is the time that the government takes to realize that India can be the leader in the world. For example, the nano. Now we are the small car capital of the world after the nano has been produced. Similarly, we will be the drug maker of the world when our first drug goes to market. But if we can reduce this democratic lag and say, let's invest in R&D now, because we recognize its value, that in the next 10 years, India must be the innovative R&D leader in the world in every industry. Then we have to shorten the time, we have to focus now, knowing that we may or may not reach its benefits because R&D is risky by definition. But if we do that quickly, that means we put more investment, we have more incentives for R&D, that we try to compete with countries like Taiwan or Korea or Israel, which are just like us, small beginning but very fast. And if we can do all that, have, you know, credits for R&D and so on, I think that we can be in the next 10 years the most innovative country in the world.
India possibly faces the world's biggest disease burden today. Infectious diseases like dengue, malaria and TB have for long been a bane of the poor, but the rise in ailments of the affluent like diabetes and cardiac troubles have also been alarming. It isn't surprising considering how little our government is spending on health today as a percentage of our national income. But clearly, this hasn't been our only problem.
We are a country which has the diseases of both the developed and the developing economies.
Double whammy.
Right? So I think that's the huge disease burden that we are challenged with, and I think unless we start innovating, you know, new solutions and addressing some of these really large unmet needs, you know, we are not going to do justice to our growth prospects, you know.
No, fundamentally the laws have to change. I'll give you an example, my favorite one, which I've been talking for 20 years, that today 70% of Indian women have anemia and more than 50 or 60% of children. The cure is only 1 rupee, you know, per day. So it's not high. Yet why aren't we getting access? And that is because we are living in the old idea that essential drugs must be cheap. Essential drugs must be affordable. Plus it should have an incentive to educate people, to have access, to have it available in rural areas. So if I was the health minister, I would do the reverse. I would incentivize people to make essential drugs. There aren't enough drugs available in the market, and we can't produce enough. and this all you know, price control. So nobody produces enough.
And it's the same for any epidemic, you know, whether it's malaria, whether it's dengue, whether it's anything. Whenever an epidemic breaks out, cholera, we're always short of drugs. And you're very right. I think it's really about the fact that the government planning machinery doesn't work well. Their stocks are either expired or there are no stocks. In fact, one of the things that also comes to my mind is that they're almost expecting the private sector drug industry to really support this whole disease challenge in this infectious disease area, whereas it is actually fundamentally a government responsibility. And therefore, as you rightly said, if they want us to play that role, then incentivize us.
I mean, I would do the other way around, like Mumbai city. I've been moving stocks from Bihar for malaria, you know, thinking, okay, where is malaria occurring in our country? And it's impossible for a private company to look at that as a whole, a country as a whole. So the government has to play its role to track the epidemiology, to see where is needed, and then, you know, tell us, and we'll support the government every way. But fundamentally, we need to change our laws. Yeah. And if we can do that, I think it would be a very big first step.
So you're saying instead of controlling the price and making it so rock bottom that you can't even afford to do anything in terms of either disease awareness or even
education,
in terms of distribution, or or even sort of reaching it out to the rural areas, because it's expensive to do that. You should actually, government should be incentivizing the industry and allowing us to basically spend and invest in these kind of activities that will provide the access.
Yeah, prevention of malaria, prevention of anemia, prevention of tuberculosis is much cheaper than the cure.
Absolutely.
So why not? Have you ever seen an ad of these? No, because no one can afford it. So we need to actually do it.
And the government is not doing its bit either. You know, I mean, they can be doing this advertising and awareness creation, but they also don't have the requisite funds to do that. So I mean, if they could partner with the private sector, and it's a very effective way of doing it. So I think it's something that the government really has to think about, you know.
I was in the US, Kiran, in the last few months, and I was amazed at how behind we are for really basic quality of standard of healthcare. I felt the nursing, you know, is much poorer here. The doctor's availability, just because the sheer number of volume of patients that he has to deal with, he doesn't have time to answer patients' questions and so on. So we have to really improve. We cannot be a global superpower if we are so behind in our healthcare.
I think there are 2 or 3 challenges the way I see it, Swati. One is, of course, the scale up issue. You know, we need scaling up the human resource element in healthcare. So it's not a, you know, we are woefully short of the number of doctors, nurses, paramedics and technicians. So I think that is one challenge, is how do we scale up in terms of human resource, and it's about low quality human resource. We don't want someone who's just very, you know, educated in a basic way. We need a trained person, we need a skilled person. So skill development and skill building to that, you know, base is very important. The second thing that we have to really focus on is standard of care. There is no standard of care. You know, there is no standard of care, there is no standard of even treatment costs for that matter. A patient has to almost shop around for the best rate. You know, I think at least in a national health system, there has to be a cashless element. You know, that's a big challenge for us. How do we make sure that any elective or any emergency medical treatment has a sort of a harmonized, standardized treatment regimen, a cost base, so that you can actually start evolving a healthcare system that the insurance can support and that the private sector can afford to, you know, also
I know
support.
you and I have been saying that the cost of pharmaceuticals is only 10% of the cost of healthcare, and very little focus on getting efficiencies, quality, management thinking, you know, accreditation in that 90% cost. And if we can apply good modern management to all this, I really think that we can improve the standard of care dramatically. We have 1 billion people, we have talented young people. If we get the right training, India can be the medicine maker of the world and the medicine provider of the world. How do we achieve that global standard?
India's poverty and medical talent is a perfect cauldron for innovation in our healthcare industry. And care providers like Piramal Healthcare's Swati Piramal are only too aware of that. Swati, a leading woman entrepreneur who drives all the R&D work at the Piramal Group, believes that the government can do a lot more to give an impetus to the private players. Public-private partnerships are a step in that direction. But really, a lot more needs to be done.
There's also a thinking now that, we need a sort of a clear demarcation of roles, What does the government need to do in terms of its role play in the healthcare story or the healthcare space? What is the private sector's role? And, one thinking is that the private sector should be the healthcare provider and the government should be the healthcare insurer, or at least, some semblance of that kind of model. You can have top up of insurance coming from the private sector, but at least basic healthcare should be covered through an insurance model that is provided by the government. And then of course, the whole private sector hospital networks in the government hospital networks are then brought into this whole system to provide the healthcare. But we all know that the government hospital network is suboptimal. So a lot of people turn to private sector.
No, Kiran, I mean, let's face the facts. In 10 years, some villages have never seen a doctor. There's over a lakh of villages which have no doctor, forget about hospitals. And we did, the Piramal Foundation does a program called E-Swasthya in about 100 villages in Rajasthan. And we tried to connect a telecom network, and with TCS we made software. But the laws are such that actually you cannot write a prescription on the phone. So first of all, we need to, how on earth? How on earth? Can we get technology? We need to use technology. Today technology is available. And if we can provide the basic modicum of healthcare to the villages which have no doctor, just simple antibiotics, painkillers, even that would take away quite a bit of the burden. But again, as I said, our laws are done before independence, before this new technology was ever available. And we must use technology. There is no other shot.
No, even immunization. What is happening today is that many immunization programs require, 2 shots and 3 shots of vaccines. You give the first dose and then you give the next dose after 3 months and the next dose maybe a year later. Now, what is happening is that you give the first dose to a village, say for instance, and then when you come back 3 months later, many of those villagers might have migrated elsewhere and they miss their dose. A year later, you don't know how many more would have migrated, and so you don't have a track of how many people have actually completed a proper immunization cycle. So government is wasting its investments in immunization programs because of this. And today with technology, you can actually track, this migration or these migrants and actually make sure that they are immunized.
Actually, I started my career very early on that premise, because we were running mills in this area where you're sitting is in Parel in Mumbai, and migrant workers used to be textile workers, India's oldest industry, and their children used to get polio. So I started a no polio zone here in a 10-kilometer radius as a young medical student to vaccinate people against polio. And I'm proud to say that now today there isn't any polio. But how can we replicate this experiment in every village in the land? That's what is really vital. If we are to become a global superpower, we cannot do it if our healthcare is so poor.
I think, the concept is, the primary health center concept was very good, but most of them don't work. They are totally dysfunctional. So I think there is a need to have primary health centers, secondary health centers, and then linking into a tertiary healthcare hospital. And now we have to look at how we can actually then get into the rural areas and create access for patients, and therefore it helps our business grow.
So I think it's just using technology and more technology, and I think really while you say there's an opportunity, we have to move with speed. We all say there's an opportunity, but how can we use time to be on our side, because other people are running much faster.
So I think that's what is required for all of us to address this healthcare challenge. Swati, thanks so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. I always enjoy talking to you.
So do I.
But I think this is a special episode on healthcare, and you know, I think people like us,
both passionate about.
No, and I think it's important for people like us to get involved in this mission, because like you rightly said, if India wants to be a global leader, without good healthcare, we cannot be that. Thanks a lot.